welcome back in. Today we're discussing our top 36 running back rankings as well as our must-start plays of the week. Let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to start with our RB1s, and they are as follows. Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, Ashton Jitty, Derrick Henry, Devon Achane, Bucky Irving, Chase Brown, Josh Jacobs, and James Conner, wrapping out the top 12. Now I'm not going to talk about a lot of these guys at the top. You're starting them regardless, no matter what. They're the studs for a reason, so we're always going to play them. The one player I did want to hit on here, though, is Devon Achane, RB8 for me this week. But there was serious concern when it comes to Achane that he would not be ready for week one due to a calf injury. However, reports surfaced that he's on track to be ready for this matchup against the Colts. Now, this is a great matchup. Last year, the Colts really struggled to stop the run. They allowed the 10th most PPR points to the position. They also allowed the 7th most rushing yards, the 12th most rushing touchdowns, and really struggled through the air, which is really where Achane comes through, as they allowed the 9th most receptions and the 13th most receiving yards to running backs last year. So this really sets up really nicely for Achane as a week one spot here. And also, I did want to mention really quickly that Jalen Wright had a procedure done. He's going to miss at least the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season. If you haven't already, you can watch our week one must-add players heading into the season, because Ollie Gordon is definitely going to be that guy. He's probably going to play this Raheem Mostert type role where he's going to get short yardage work. He's going to get goal line carries. And so while I'm not playing Ollie Gordon in week one, I do think that he is certainly somebody that should be rostered way more than 25% of leagues he's rostered in right now. So let's keep it moving. We're going to move over to another player here, and that's going to be James Conner, RB12. Great matchup here against the Saints. Last year, he averaged almost 18 touches per game. He was top 10 in red zone touches, saw 11% target share, which is a very healthy number for a running back. His 8.7 yards per reception and 2.2 yards per outrun ranked inside the top 8 as well. So even though he's getting up there at heading into age 30 season, he was still very productive on a per touch basis last year. And he finishes the RB15 in fantasy points per game. And the Cardinals get a great matchup here against the Saints. They are 5.5-point favorites. And the Saints defense struggled to stop the run all last year, as they allowed the 6th most rushing yards, tied with the most rushing touchdowns, and the 7th most PPR points to the position. So that being said, let's move over here to our RB2s, and I think there's a lot more to discuss, and this is where a little bit more decision-making is going to come into who you're going to play. And let's start off with Chuba Hubbard, Kenneth Walker, Alvin Kamara, Kyren Williams, James Cook, Amarian Hampton, Breece Hall, Treveyon Henderson, Isiah Pacheco, Tyrone Tracy, Aaron Jones, and Tony Pollard, wrapping out our RB2s. So the first guy I want to talk about really quickly is a player that I really wanted to get in my top 12. Just couldn't do it, but still phenomenal matchup here for Chuba Hubbard. He's my RB13. Averaged almost 20 touches per game last year. He was top 15 in red zone touches, 12% target share. He also ran the 9th most routes. Now, this offseason, the backfield's going to look a little bit different. Miles Sanders is gone. They brought in Rico Dowdle to be the backup, and then Trevor Etienne they also drafted in the 6th round. But Chuba Hubbard is aligned here in a really good role. Dave Canales does a very good job with his running backs. We go back to whenever he was with the Bucs and what we saw with Rachaad White before Bucky Irving got there. And then last year with Chuba Hubbard, having a really, really good season last year for Chuba Hubbard. And so I think things are just going to continue. I think he's going to be a 65, 70% opportunity share guy. He's going to handle a large portion of this backfield touches. And like I said, phenomenal matchup against the Jaguars, who have the 2nd most fantasy points per game last year to the position. So next up is going to be Kenneth Walker against the 49ers. When Kenneth Walker played last year, he handled a large chunk of the workload, 72% opportunity share. He averaged nearly 19, 20 touches per game with a 14% target share and the 5th highest route participation. He had the 6th highest expected fantasy points per game. Now, Walker has been dealing with a foot injury that has kept him sidelined for a lot of training camp. Now, he is expected to be ready to go for week one. They did come out today and talk about how they're going to probably limit him when it comes to practice time, that they're going to give him days off throughout the week to try to manage his foot injury. So that is a little bit worrisome, but at the very least, week one, he's going to be good to go. This 49ers defense was terrible against the run last year. They allowed the 3rd most PPR points to running backs last year. Now, I will say they did invest in their defensive line this offseason, selecting Michael Williams in the 1st round, Alfred Collins in the 2nd round, and CJ West in the 4th round. It will likely take some time to see some improvement here. So I think this really makes Kenneth Walker a high-end RB2, maybe even a consideration for a low-end RB1. Next up is going to be Alvin Kamara, RB15. Gets a matchup here against the Cardinals. Now, last year, he averaged 16.3 carries, but really where he made his money last year was his 6.4 targets per game. He had over 500 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns, and averaged 19 fantasy points per game. A lot of it had to do with this 21% target share, which is absolutely absurd for any running back. He was second in route participation and ninth in yards per route run. Now, the new coaching staff here is what worries me a little bit. And this is something that I really want to see how things play out with Alvin Kamara, who is entering his age 30 season. But historically, Kellen Moore has not been a coach that has targeted running backs out of the backfield. That is certainly a concern when it comes to Alvin Kamara, because, like I said, that's where the majority of his value comes from in PPR formats. And so, this is something that I definitely want to see. I don't really love this offense. Spencer Rattler is going to be the starting quarterback here. There's not a lot to like with this offense, so if Alvin Kamara loses any of his volume in the passing game, it's going to hurt him. Now, I will say last year, the Cardinals did struggle to stop the run last year. They allowed the eighth most rushing yards, but where they really struggled was against pass catching running backs, allowing the eighth most receiving yards and the sixth most receiving touchdowns. Overall, they allowed the ninth most PPR points to running backs. Now, I will say the Cardinals did do a lot to upgrade this defense over the offseason. Now, their defense was kind of a sneak defense last year, and I think that they have the potential to be a top 12 to 15 defense this season. Now, they are going to be missing Walter Nolan, their first round pick, at least to start the season. Let's keep it moving here. We're going to move over to Kyren Williams, RB16 for me. Now, last year he averaged 19.8 carries, but only 2.5 targets, and that really worries me this season because there's already been speculation and talk from this coaching staff that they're wanting to limit Kyren Williams this year. They do not want him to handle 20 carries per game like he did last year. But last year he was supremely inefficient. He's been inefficient for most of his career. He's become a volume monster. And if he loses some volume, and let's say he goes from 20 carries a game down to 15 carries per game, and as somebody who's not involved at all in the passing game, he is going to be completely touchdown reliant on a week-to-week basis. He's good for him to pay off any sort of value here. But then I will say this is a very bad matchup. The Texans were awesome against the run last year. I don't think anything's changing from that this year. They allow the 11th fewest rushing yards, the 6th fewest rushing touchdowns, and the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. So while, like I said, you're 100% starting Kyren Williams because where you drafted him, I would just temper expectations a little bit because this just isn't a great matchup for Kyren Williams. Next up, let's talk about James Cook, RB17. Very kind of similar situation. Now, he didn't see the same type of volume in terms of the rush attempts, only averaged 12.9 carries, but again, wasn't involved at all in the passing game, which was a little bit surprising because years before that, he was well more involved in the passing game. But his 2.4 targets is not something you want to see because most of his production came from the 18 touchdowns he scored last year. Now, he was awarded a contract extension during training camp, but this just isn't a great matchup for running backs. The Baltimore last year was phenomenal against the run, allowing the fewest rushing yards, the 6th fewest touchdowns, and the 5th fewest fantasy points to running backs last year. So I'm not all that excited about James Cook this week. Like I said, you're starting him because you probably don't have a better option. But I would, again, temper expectations here. Just a very, very bad matchup against the Baltimore run defense. Let's keep moving here. We're going to talk about Treveyon Henderson. The hype surrounding Henderson has reached an absurd level this offseason, but could also very well be warranted here because the Patriots offense is one that I really like as a pretty solid bounce back spot here now with everything they've done this offseason. The real question for him will be, is he simply just going to be a pass catching work similar to like a James White early on in the season? And how much rushing work is he going to see with Ramondre Stevenson getting a lot of that work? Now, I will say the Raiders last year were middle of the road when it came to running backs. I think at PPR formats, I'm 100% firing up Treveyon Henderson, and I'm going to do so as well at half-point PPR. But this is just one of those situations that I kind of want to see how early on things are going to play out. Is he going to be just simply more of a pass-catching option early on in the season, and then he starts to progress and earn more and more opportunities as a runner? Or is it something where he's going to come out of the gate and handle 15 touches per game? If that's the case, Treveyon Henderson's going to be a top 15 running backs on most weeks. He's super explosive, great athlete, great pass catcher, and not a bad matchup against the Raiders this week. I probably could have him a little higher than I do at 20, just with a little bit of uncertainty with how this backfield is going to shake out. Is why I have him at RB20. Next up for me is going to be Tyrone Tracy. Now, last year, he kind of burst onto the scene. Now, he was one of my favorite sleepers heading into last year, somebody that I really loved to have on my team. And from week 5 on, he was the RB14 in fantasy points per game, averaging nearly 14 fantasy points per game. He was also top 20 in yards per touch and yards created per touch. Now, they did draft Cam Scattaboo in the 4th round, but he missed significant portions of training camp and the preseason. He finally got back the last preseason game of the season. I think Tyrone Tracy's been undervalued for most of this year. That everybody just expected the new toy was going to come in and take this role from him. And right now, there is zero indication that that's going to happen, that Tyrone Tracy has easily won this job. And we know that Brian Dable just typically just has a workhorse back. He's not somebody that really runs a committee. And so with that being said, Tyrone Tracy sets up really well, probably to see 65-70% of the opportunities from this backfield. And this sets up as a really nice matchup. Washington was terrible against the run last year. They allowed over 5 yards per carry, which was the second worst rate in the league, as well as the sixth most rushing touchdowns. He's a locked in, low end RB2 for me this week. Next up for me is going to be Isiah Pacheco, RB20. After breaking his fibula last year, Pacheco is back looking like his old self and is primed to be the lead back of this backfield. He likely handled the lion's share of the touches with Kareem Hunt mixing in. The real question for me is going to be, though, how much goal line work does Kareem Hunt take away? That worries me a little bit. But other than that, I think Isiah Pacheco is going to handle the majority of the touches from this backfield. Now, I will say this isn't a great matchup against the Chargers. They were a very stingy run defense last year. Chargers allowed the seventh fewest fantasy points to running backs, as well as only allowed 4 rushing touchdowns, which was the lowest in the league to running backs. So I still think he's a low-end RB2 and somebody that you're going to be plugging in. Let's move over to some of our RB3s that I want to talk about here. First up is going to be Travis Etienne. Now, this is one I think I could easily see play out a lot differently than most people expected, because the narrative all offseason was he was going to get traded, or Bashaw Tutin or Tank Bigsby were going to take over his job from him. I don't think that's going to happen, at least early on in the year. I definitely think that he's going to be the pass catcher of this backfield for sure. And I still think he's gonna handle probably 12 to 14 carries per game. And this just sets up as a really good matchup. Let's not forget, the Panthers were absolutely dreadful last year. They allowed nearly 5 fantasy points more per game than the next defense last year. They were absolutely dreadful against opposing running backs. Next up is going to be DeAndre Swift. Now, Swift enters 2025 as the lead back, and at least early in the season, with the amount of injuries that this team has at the running back position. But the Bears did invest heavily in their offense, and most notably their offensive line, by trading for Joe Thuney, who's still one of the best left guards in the league, as well as Jonah Jackson to play right guard. And then they brought in standout center Drew Dalman. So this offensive line is going to be really good this year. Despite all that, though, this is a really bad matchup against the Vikings, as they allowed just 4.1 yards per carry, which is the 4th lowest rate in the league, as well as the 9th fewest fantasy points to running back. So I'm not as excited about DeAndre Swift. I think if he's going to get there this week, it's going to have to be through the air, which he's definitely going to be the pass-catching running back. That's why I have him as an RB3. Next up is going to be RJ Harvey. Look, you're probably starting Harvey no matter what because of where you drafted him. I just don't know exactly how the touch distribution is going to be handed out in this backfield. I definitely think J.K. Dobbins is going to have a role in this offense. I think it could be a little bit more of a 50-50 split, at least to start. I think J.K. Dobbins could end up being the third down running back, which is going to hurt Harvey a little bit. RJ Harvey is still somebody I'm going to play. Just again, I think he's more of a flex option than I would consider him an RB2 this week against the Titans. And then lastly, you have running backs here like Javonte Williams, and Javonte Williams is going to be the lead back here of this backfield. It's just, this is a stone cold worst matchup that you could ask for right out of the gate. You have injuries to this offensive line of the Cowboys, and honestly, the Eagles last year were phenomenal against the run, allowing just 4.3 yards per carry to opposing backs and just 5 rushing touchdowns. Only the Chargers allowed fewer than they did. I just think that if he's going to get there this week, Javonte Williams, it's going to be through the air. He's definitely going to be at least the early season pass catching back as well here. He obviously had 75 targets last year, which was top 5 among all running backs. I think if he's going to get there this week and meet any sort of value, that's how he's going to get there. If I have better options, I'm just not playing Javonte Williams, because this is a stone cold worst matchup here for Javonte Williams. And then lastly, some other guys. I think Austin Ekeler is a little bit interesting here. I think, like I've said, now that they moved on from Brian Robinson, I think he's being slept on. Most people got super excited about JCM here. I don't even have him in my top 12 because I don't know what's going to happen with this backfield. Only thing I know for sure is that Austin Ekeler is going to be the pass catching running back here. And he has the potential to see 5 or 6 targets in this game against the Giants, and he's still going to probably see 8 to 10 carries in this game. And so I think he is a fine flex option. But the other running backs, I just want to see how all this is going to play out. They've said that Chris Rodriguez is going to have a role. Is this going to be a 3-down committee, which is kind of gross? And so I know a lot of people drafted Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt thinking that they were just going to plug him into the rosters for week 1. I don't necessarily hate the matchup against the Giants, though I'll say they have one of the best front 4 in all of football this year, with them being able to draft Abdul Carter and everybody else they have there already. So this isn't necessarily the matchup that I want that I'm most excited to play a running back against. For me, I think Austin Ekeler is the only one in PPR formats that I'm really going to. That being said, if you have any questions whatsoever, I don't care if they're start sit questions, trade questions, anything that you may have, waiver questions, put them in the comments section below. I promise you will answer every single one of them. And if you haven't already, hit the like, hit the subscribe. Week 1 is back. Thank goodness football is back. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.